Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about a big reason why your robotic affirming may not be working. And it actually has to do with using willpower when you are robotically affirming. In fact, in my How I Mastered Robotic Affirmations video, I'll link it above if you're curious of watching it, but I talk about this idea of affirming to neutrality. And this was something I discovered by myself. I didn't have any outside resources that told me to affirm to neutrality. It was just something that I did and noticed that I got results when I affirmed to neutrality. But a couple months after I discovered this technique of affirming to neutrality, did I discover this technique of psychotherapy that looked very similar to what I was doing with my robotic affirmations. And when I discovered this information, everything just clicked and made complete sense of why these robotic affirmations worked when I affirmed to neutrality. And it gave me an understanding and more awareness of how to use robotic affirmations in an effective way. What a lot of people don't realize when they're practicing robotic affirmations is that they're actually practicing a form of conscious autosuggestion, which was, I believe, first coined by a man named Emil Quay. He has a book called Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion. I highly recommend you read it. It's a phenomenal book. But he goes into more depth about how we can use this art of conscious autosuggestion to control our subconscious mind and direct our imagination. And when you look at the parallels between what robotic affirming is and conscious autosuggestion is, you see that they're the exact same thing. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to robotic affirming is exerting willpower when they are robotically affirming. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video, and how to actually start robotically affirming in a more effective way where your will and your imagination are not in contrast. Because as we'll talk about in just a sec, when your will and your imagination are in contrast, your imagination will win every single time, which is actually a very good thing. All right, so let's first define what suggestion and autosuggestion is. And I'm going to be reading some quotes from Emil Quay's book to help illustrate these points further. The way that Emil Quay defines suggestion is the act of imposing an idea on the brain of another, whereas autosuggestion is defined as the implanting of an idea in oneself by oneself. So essentially, suggestion and autosuggestion are the same thing, but suggestion is about imposing the idea or a belief in someone else. Autosuggestion is implanting the idea in oneself by oneself. When it comes to robotic affirmations, we know that we're saying them in order to saturate our subconscious mind with the desired end result. Emil Quay talks about this idea as well. He says that autosuggestion is the medium for influencing the subconscious mind. And the way he summarizes what autosuggestion is at its core is, thus understood, autosuggestion is nothing but hypnotism as I see it. And I would define it in these simple words: the influence of the imagination upon the moral and physical being of mankind. And so very similar to what Neville Goddard suggests when he talks about SATs is Emil Quay talks about practicing autosuggestion in the early mornings right before you wake up and in the late evenings right before you're about to fall asleep, because you're practicing it at a time where your conscious effort is naturally suspended in those feelings of drowsiness when you first wake up and right before you fall asleep. And he also says if you want to practice autosuggestion in the daytime, the way you do it without exerting willpower is in a very passive yet rapid way of speaking. Very similar to how I talked about how I personally mastered robotic affirmations, where I talk about affirming to neutrality. I was unknowingly practicing this art of conscious autosuggestion in the correct way. And for the record, conscious autosuggestion is not something unheard of. In fact, if you look at all these different manifesting techniques and what their goal is, it's all about learning how to saturate your subconscious mind, and usually through a form of hypnotism in some way. Neville Goddard SATs, hypnotism, you have hypnotherapy. And the biggest one that, at least from my perspective, a lot of people don't realize that they're doing is robotic affirming or robotic affirmations. Because as we know, robotic affirmations are said in a very chronic and fast state of being. But what a lot of people don't realize is that those robotic affirmations are a form of conscious autosuggestion, which is a form of hypnotizing yourself. Remember, you're never affirming to change your 3D reality. You're affirming to change yourself so that the 3D reality reflects your new self, your new state of being, your new self-concept, your your new truth or your new paradigm that you have selected in your imagination. As we know, what we saturate our subconscious mind with is reflected onto this creative space. And one of the main rules we could say that autosuggestion is based off of, according to Emil, is understanding that the imagination is superior to the will. What this means is that if the imagination and the will are in contrast with each other, imagination will always win. However, when imagination and will are in alignment with each other, that is where self-mastery lies. Now, the second thing to understand when it comes to autosuggestion is the law of converted effort, which is all about not exerting willpower when you are practicing conscious autosuggestion or robotic affirmations. And I'm going to read a couple quotes from his book to illustrate this point further. People are always preaching the doctrine of effort, but this idea must be repudiated. Effort means will, and will means the possible entrance of the imagination in opposition of the desire, bringing about exactly the contrary result of the desired outcome. He goes on to give this example of a man trying to go to sleep. He suffers from insomnia. And as he's laying in bed, he tells himself, I want to sleep. I will sleep. I am going to sleep. And as he's saying these words, he's putting in effort, trying to make himself fall asleep. What Emil Quay argues here is that the very act of exerting effort in these situations, where we're trying to make ourselves do something, is what brings up the opposite of our desired end result. So in the example of this man trying to sleep, instead of falling asleep, he just stays up awake, fighting to fall asleep. To illustrate this idea further, he quotes, "The very fact of exerting effort has converted the latter into a force acting in a sense contrary to the original suggestion, with the result that the poor man tosses and turns in his bed in wretched sleeplessness." And he argues that, again, I quote, "The imagination should be left unhindered. Let it do its work alone, unhindered. Be quite passive." I cannot too strongly insist that in practice of autosuggestion, the exercise of willpower must be strictly avoided, except in the initial phase of directing or guiding the imagination on the desired lines. So with that being said, how do we do this? How do we affirm without exerting willpower? And how do we even tell the difference on if we are exerting willpower or not in our robotic affirmations or in our conscious autosuggestion? The first thing to understand is that you are not fighting your imagination. You are only learning how to direct it. And just to reiterate, the way you direct your imagination is not through using willpower or effort. And this is where a lot of people start struggling with robotic affirming. What will end up happening is they'll have either the old story come up in their consciousness or they'll have a 3D circumstance pop up in their reality. And that circumstance will cause them to start affirming from the place of using willpower, because subconsciously what they're trying to do is to control their imagination or the 3D circumstance that has just happened. So for example, let's say that you have an SP that comes back into your reality as the old version of themselves. And in response to the situation or the circumstance, you start panically affirming your desired end result, your desired version of them. No, they're perfect in every way. They always show up the way I want them to. My SP loves me, my SP loves me, my SP loves me. And you're panically affirming your desired version of them, whatever that may be. What you're doing in that situation is exerting willpower over your imagination. Where you are in your imagination is in the realm of your SP not conforming or showing up the version that you want them to be. And in response, you're basically attacking your imagination with willpower, trying to change your imagination, which, as we know from what autosuggestion is just amplifying the problem of more worry, more panic. But let's say you have the exact same situation happen where your SP shows up as their old version rather than your preferred version of them. Instead of panically affirming in your robotic affirmations, which again implies willpower, instead what you do is you direct your imagination by affirming in that hypnotic state, which is by affirming very rapidly and indifferently. When you get really good at autosuggestion, you'll see that you're actually affirming to be neutral rather than emotional. What you're doing is taking control over your imagination and directing it out of the state of worry to the state of having, to the state of your desired end result. You're literally hypnotizing yourself rather than fighting your imagination. That's the difference between affirming through willpower and hypnotic affirming, or autosuggestion, or robotic affirmations, whatever you want to call it. Remember, this is also another big area that some people sometimes forget when they are in the process of manifesting through robotic affirmations. You're not changing your SP. You're not changing how they showed up to you in your 3D reality. You're not changing your 3D reality at all. You're changing yourself. And by changing yourself, your SP naturally shows up differently. And so another thing to understand is that when you panic affirm over situations that happen in your physical reality, what you're accidentally trying to do is trying to control the circumstance instead of controlling yourself, controlling your state of being. Autosuggestion, when you affirm indifferently, neutrally, or in this hypnotic state, you're changing your state of being. Again, autosuggestion and robotic affirmations are just a method of hypnotizing yourself, or in other words, saturating your subconscious mind by learning how to direct your imagination. And another thing I want to mention is I get a lot of comments of people telling me that they affirmed through the tears, or affirmed through the worry, affirmed through the panic, affirmed through the circumstance. I call all of this as affirming through the tears, which the way I define persisting through the tears is by persisting through whatever emotional reaction you're having to your imagination or to your physical reality. But whether you realize it or not, affirming through the tears is actually a form of autosuggestion. You can have an emotional reaction or response to a situation and take control of that emotional reaction through autosuggestion or robotic affirming. Like I said, they're the same thing. What you're doing as you affirm through the tears, especially when you're affirming without willpower, is actually taking control of your imagination and your emotional reaction and directing you to your desired end result. Emil Quay actually talks a lot about autosuggestion and how it's actually the key to self-mastery. And he actually shares specific examples of people who have physical ailments where they physically cannot do something, and they practice this art of conscious autosuggestion, and then they are able to do physically the thing that they were not able to do before, all by learning how to direct their imagination through the art of autosuggestion. So he gives a lot of examples like this. Like, I believe he one time had a patient where they had some sort of disease where they were clenched up, like their body was very clenched and they couldn't unclench it. Like, they were basically just this like bored. I'm not sure what the problem was or what the disease was, but in this particular patient, the way that Emil Quay basically cured this man, I forget the exact words he used in the autosuggestion for this particular problem, but I believe he started small. He first started with the man's hands. He was like, I open my hand, I open my hand, I open my hand. And he had the man say it, again, very fast in a very clear voice without any effort. And what the man found that he was able to do was eventually open his hand. And essentially, he went through the man's entire body and got the man to actually start moving again, all through autosuggestion. He also talks about healing physical ailments like headaches, for example, almost immediately through autosuggestion. He says that if you have a headache, the autosuggestion that you can use to alleviate that headache is it passes, it passes, it passes, it passes, literally until the headache passes. The point I want to make here, though, is that even with physical ailments, he proves that by directing your imagination through autosuggestion in the correct way without using willpower or effort, you actually alleviate the thing you do not prefer, the thing you don't want. In this case, he talks about physical ailments. When you affirm through the tears, what you're doing is you're taking control of your imagination, except more specifically with an emotional reaction rather than a physical ailment. You're basically affirming until you stop crying. You're affirming until you feel a little bit better or until you feel neutral. Eventually, you're going to stop crying. Eventually, you're going to realize again who you are. You're God of your reality. But I want to wrap up this video just by driving home this point. If you practice robotic affirmations, make sure you're doing it without exerting willpower or effort onto your imagination. You're not learning to manipulate your imagination, you're learning how to direct your imagination, which some might say that's the exact same thing, but when you are having an emotional reaction to your physical reality, sometimes what can happen is it can cause this level of panic within our system, which just perpetuates the problem. Very much similar to the man trying to will himself to fall asleep. I will sleep, I'm going to sleep, and just perpetuating the fact that he is not sleeping. So if you really want to get good at this art of robotic affirming, practice not using willpower. Practice saying your robotic affirmations in a neutral tone of voice, chronically, quickly, in a way that feels like you're hypnotizing yourself in a way. Because remember, that's what you're doing essentially. You're saturating your subconscious mind so that your 3D reflects in a favorable way for you. So take your power back. Practice not using effort or willpower in your affirming and watch your reality transform. This is why manifesting can be so easy. It's because we think we have to put in all of this effort, we have to learn how to get it right. No, you just have to select what you want and then persist in it indifferently. The more effort you put in, vibrationally speaking, the less control you have over your being, because the only reason why you would be putting in effort in the first place is if you feel like you are not God of your reality, or you don't have control over the situation, or you don't feel empowered in relationship to this particular circumstance or situation. So try this out. Practice affirming to, like I mentioned in my other video, neutrality, but more specifically without using effort or willpower. The only effort or willpower you want to exert is in the initial step of pivoting to your robotic affirmation. That is it. The persisting should be done indifferently in a very passive and neutral manner that almost feels like a very hypnotic state of affirming, without any tension or exertion whatsoever. When it comes to robotic affirming, passiveness is the name of the game, alright? So I'm going to end the video here. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comments below. As always, I love hearing your perspectives, but that's all for now. Until next time, keep creating, everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!